this is our new topic. For this, you can take down a question. The question is, explain giving examples the connection between the state and the Sufi tradition. So here we are going to study or see what type of connection do the state and the Sufi tradition have. So as we go through the book, the first thing that we came to know is that the major characteristics of Chishti community was its simplicity and disciplined life. They emphasized to remain away from the worldly power, but it did not mean that they really keep aloof or away from the political power. The Chishtis accepted all the donations made by the royal rulers. However, they themselves never demanded such gifts or donations. The Sultan gave Khanqah's land in donation. Many trusts were also set up regarding grants, gifts, and donation. The Chishtis accepted donations both in cash and kind, but they never accumulated donations. They spent them on immediate requirement like food, clothes, living quarters, and ritual necessities. It enhanced the moral authority of the sheikhs, who attracted people from all walks of life. They became very popular as they possessed piety, scholarship, then miraculous powers and royal patronage. That is why all the rulers tried to secure their support. Now the sultans knew that most of their subjects did not follow Islam. So when the Turks set up the Delhi Sultanate, they rejected the wish of ulama to impose Shariat or Sharia as state law. They expected opposition from their subjects as majority of them were non-Muslims. They depended on the Sufis, who derived their authority directly from God. They did not depend on jurists to interpret the Shariat or the Sharia. Then there are many examples of the conflict between the sultans and the Sufis. Both wanted to assert their authority. Both emphasized the prostration and kissing of the feet. Because of the moral authority of the Chishtis, the king often wanted their tombs to be in vicinity of Sufi shrines. On the other hand, the Sufi sheikhs were also addressed with high sounding titles. For example, the disciple of Nizamuddin Aulia addressed him as Sultan ul Maha Sheikh, which means Sultan amongst Sheikh. The other Sufis like Shurawardi under the Delhi Sultans and Naqshbandi under the Mughals were also associated with the state, but their association was different from those of Chishtis. The Sufis accepted courtly offices, whereas the Chishtis never accepted them. So we reach the new topic. This is New Devotional Paths, Dialogue and Dissent in Northern India. So our first topic under this is 8.1, Weaving a Divine Fabric, about Kabir. So you can take down a question for this. The question is, how did Kabir describe the ultimate reality through his poems? So let us see what Kabir wanted to bring out after writing his poems. First of all, Kabir occupies an important place among poet saints. Historians have studied his life and his age on the basis of his poetry and biographies, which were written later on. Now, verses of Kabir were compiled into three distinct but overlapping traditions. The first one is Kabir Bijak, which is preserved by Kabir Panth in Varanasi and elsewhere in Uttar Pradesh. Then another one, or the second one, is Kabir Granthavali, which is associated with the Dadupant in Rajasthan. Then the other one, or the third one, is except these, many of these compilations are also found in Adi Granth Sahib Ji. Now all the manuscripts were the compilations or were made only after his death. So let's see now what kind of dialogues or languages he used while composing all these things. Now composition of Kabir are available in many languages and dialects. Few of these are composed in the special language of Nirguna poets, the Sant Bhasha. Some compositions, which are known as Ulat Bansi, upside down sayings, are written in such a way that everyday meaning are inverted. Now when you talk about Ulat Bansi means something where a person want to say something, but the meaning, whatever he said, it is not it's not the exact thing what he wanted to say. For example, pani mein aag lagana. So now this is completely an Ulat Bansi, means opposite talking or opposite type of saying, because nobody can lit a fire in on water, but it is said pani mein aag lagana. So now that means meanings are inverted. So he started writing some of his composition in Ulat Bansi. Now this composition expresses the difficulties of capturing the reality, or you can say the nature of the ultimate reality in words. Expressions like the lotus which blooms without flower, or the fire raging in the ocean, expresses the meanings of Kabir's mystical experiences. So with this Ulat Bansi, we came to know that he had such a great quality of writing that people could not even imagine what he wanted to say, but yes, he had already said what he needed to say and what he wanted to bring out. So the next part under this is all about like different names of the ultimate reality. Now Kabir did not believe in God. Okay, Kabir did not say that I have believed in many gods or this and that. So now Kabir gave different names of this ultimate reality. Ultimate reality means God. In Islam, these include Allah, Hazrat, Khuda and Pir. He also used terms taken from Vedantic traditions like Alak, the unseen, Nirankar means formless or Nirakar, then Brahman or Atma, etc. Now other terms with mystical connotations like Shabda means sound or Shunya means emptiness were taken from the yogic traditions. Now these are all the things, means in his poems he brought all these things so that people could know that God is being called with different names. So that is what he wanted to brought about, means speak about the ultimate reality. When you say ultimate reality means God. Okay, so what did he describe about them or about the God? That is the thing that you can see in the last paragraph of this topic. So when you go through this part, you will see that different names are being called, different types of calling for a God is being made. So wherever, from where he got all these names are also given there. He said that he did not get it only from one religion, he got it from different religion, Islam, Vedantic traditions, then yogic traditions, so and other are mystical connotations. So from all this he connected the words and then he have described the ultimate reality in his way or the way he understood, and that understanding he brought it out so that common people could know that God is being called with different names. So we are discussing about the same topic, but it is in the next page. Now under this topic we come across one of the controversy, that is the controversy about the birth and death of Kabir. So you can take down a question for this part. The question is, describe the controversy about the birth and death of Kabir. So we all know who was Kabir. So anyways, let us see in a brief. So Kabir was a well-known religious figure of medieval India. His date of birth is subject to uncertainty. The most probable date which is taken is 1398. Now he was born in a Brahmin family, but brought up in a Muslim couple, or by a Muslim couple named Niru and Nema. Now this people, or this Muslim couple, were actually weavers, and now these people, being very poor, they could not give him, or they could not send him for any kind of formal education. But Ramananda became his guru, or was a guru of Kabir. Now he had a deep influence on his life. Under his influence, he became a saint. Throughout his life, Kabir never used the word guru for any individual, but they were not contemporary to each other. But it is also not acceptable fact. Kabir did not wanted to say the word guru to anyone. Then the followers of Kabir organized themselves as Kabir Panthis after his death. Now Kabir died in 1518 at Magpur in Gorakhpur. So as we said, after his death, they started to call themselves as Kabir Panthis. Now still the controversy was unsolved, or is unsolved. It is still going on. It is an issue of controversy. Now nobody could really solve that, whether he was a Hindu or a Muslim. Okay, the issue of birth and death of Kabir is still unsolved. Describe the teachings of Guru Nanak Dev. So from the question itself, we came to know that we are going to study about the teachings of Guru Nanak Dev. So before that, let us see who was Guru Nanak. A small or a brief note about him, or about who was Guru Nanak. So Guru Nanak was born in a Hindu merchant family, and the village where he was born was known as Nanka Sahib. This was near the river Ravi, and this area basically or predominantly was a Muslim Punjab. That means the mass of the population which lives in that, or which lived in that area, were Islam followers. Then at a very young age he was married. Even though he was married, he loved to spend his time with Sufis and Bhaks. He was a trained accountant and also had studied Persian. Now, whatever he said, whatever he spoke out, was written in hymns and teachings. Now, from these hymns and teachings, we could make out that he supported Nirguna, or he was following Nirguna Bhakti system. He really disliked the external practices of many religions that he saw around, that is, sacrifices, baths, or means ritual baths, then image worship, scriptures of both Hindus and Muslims he disliked. Now for him, he said that Rab, that means the absolute or the supreme power, has got no gender or form. He also proposed a simple way to connect the God or the divine, and that is by remembering and repeating the divine name, expressing his ideas, and through hymns called Shabd in Punjabi. And this was a language which was predominant in that region. Then Baba Guru Nanak used to sing all this composition in various ragas with his attendant, that is Mardana, and he played the Rabab. Now Baba Guru Nanak organized his followers into a community. He used to set up rules for his worship, or Sangat, that is congregational worship, Sangat, in which he will say that involving collective recitation. Whatever they say, they will. Whatever he said, whatever they say should be go. It should go together. They don't recite this and that. They will just recite something which is correct, something which is really supporting the Guru Nanak way of living. So they will recite all this thing. He appointed one of his disciples named Angad to succeed him as the preceptor, that means as the Guru after him. And this practice was followed for nearly 200 years. That means after Angad there will be one more Guru. That means everyone after a period of certain year there will be a new Guru. So this continued for 200 years. But we came to know that Guru Nanak never wanted to establish a new religion. But after his death, his followers started to teach the practice or own this practice, and they all did it in distinguished manner. That means they try to keep themselves away from Hindus and Muslims. So they say that we have to do something different so that they can remain or they can be recognized. So their fifth preceptor or the Guru, named Guru Arjan, what did he do is that he compiled the hymns whatever Guru Nanak said along with those of his four successors. Means he did not just wrote a book of Guru Nanak's hymns, but he also wrote what the other four preceptors or the Gurus also had said. So in that way a book was made. And other religious poets like Baba Farid, Ravidas, or who is also known as Raidas, and Kabir in one of a book. The name of the book was Adi Granth Sahib. Now these hymns were also known as Gurbani, and all this Gurbani used to be sang, or the followers used to sing in the Gurudwaras. In the late 17th century, the 10th preceptor, that is Guru Gobind Singh. Now what did he do is that he included a composition of 9th Guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur, and his scripture was also became famous. He called it as Guru Granth Sahib. Now Guru Gobind Singh also laid the foundation of Khalsa Panth, means he found a new set of followers. Now Khalsa Panth, an army of pure, which means, and defined its 5 symbols, means those who were a part of Khalsa, they should be like this, means they should have all these 5 things, that is uncut hair, they cannot cut hair, a dagger should be with them, a pair of shorts, a comb, and a steel bangle. Under him the community got very much famous, and they were also known as a socio-religious military force. So this was all about the teachings of Guru Nanak. What you need to remember in this part is the name of the preceptors or the Gurus after him. So they may ask you the names of the first Guru, the 9th Guru, the 10th Guru, or the last Guru. Okay. Mirabai, the devotee princess. So for this topic, take down a question. Write a note on Mirabai. So as we go through the part, we can see that she was considered as the best known women poet within the Bhakti tradition. Her biographies have been reconstructed on the basis of bhajans which was sang by her. All these bhajans were transmitted for centuries, and this was done orally. Mirabai was a Rajput prince of Merta in Marwar, but she was married against her wishes with a prince of Sisodia clan of Mewar. Then she defied the order of her husband and refused to take the traditional responsibilities of a wife and a mother. She recognized Krishna, the avatar of Vishnu, as her husband. Her in-laws tried to poison her, but she left the palace and started to live as a wandering singer. She composed a number of songs full of intense expression of emotions. Then Mirabai also defied the norms of caste society. Now, it is said that after rejecting the comforts of the palace, she had donned the white robes of a widow or the saffron robe of the renouncer. That means, she did not follow any kind of rules regulation which was written according to the bhakti, according to the Brahmanical way of living. So what did she do is that instead of wearing the dress, because she is not a widow, but still she started wearing a white robe and a saffron robe too. Saffron, which is a sound of a renouncer, means someone who sacrificed everything and then just following the God. Then, although she did not attract a number of followers and neither she found a sect, but she remained a source of inscription for centuries. Songs sung by Mirabai are still sung by people even today, especially by poor people of Gujarat and Rajasthan. Reconstructing histories of religious traditions. This is our new topic. So for this you can take down your question. The question is, explain the variety of sources used by historians to reconstruct histories of religious traditions. So we can very easily see that historians have drawn so many sources to reconstruct histories of religious traditions. Now, in order to give us some ideas of religious traditions, what did they do is they start to read up, or they started to write something on sculpture. They wrote something on architecture, or the stories about religious preceptors or gurus. They also started to find out the composition which is given or attributed to women and men engaged in the quest of understanding the nature of the divine. All these historians, they never try to give up any of the sources which they think that will give us some new ideas. As we had just seen that in order to reconstruct histories, they read so many religious buildings, which includes stupas, monasteries, temples. Now these buildings were exactly the symbols of any specific religion's beliefs and practices. Now they went for some reconstruction of other religious beliefs of this age, and they can also make up the basic textual traditions like the Puranas. Except these, few other religious beliefs were also was read, which was faintly visible to all of us. Then another part that they went through was the literary sources. Now the textual traditions or the books. Now what did they do is here that they started to read up the textual sources from 8th to 18th centuries, which include composition of saints. Most of these were composition expressed themselves orally or in different types of ways of writing. Now several ideas, several variety of languages and several style could be seen, and all these were studied by historians. They range from different dialogues of Vachanas of Vasavana to the ornate Persian of the Farman of Mughal emperors. All these were read up by the historians, and after reading up by the historians, they brought it out so that common man could know what is the source of this history. Otherwise, we cannot just blindly believe what is being given in the book. Other varieties of sources which was used to reconstruct the history of Sufi traditions were the Kashf-ul-Mahzub. It was written by Data Ganj Baksh and provided us a detailed information about Sufi principle and the mode of practicing them. Another one was known as Makubat. So this it means a collection of letters written by Sufi saints to the disciples and associates. Now Makubagh provides us valuable information about the religious experiences of Sufi saints. Next is the Malfuzats. They were the collections of Sufi saints and are of two kinds. The kinds of Malfuzats were written after the death of Sheikh, while second kind were written during the lifetime of Sheikh. Next was the Tashkiras. Tashkiras refers to the biographic accounts of the Sufi saints. Mir Khawat Kirmani wrote Shiar-ul-Aluya, first Tashkira in India in the 14th century. Akbar-ul-Akhyar, the most valuable Tashkiras, throw a light of the life of the 225 Sufi saints. So when you read all this, or when people go through all these things, then only they came to know like what are the sources, or from where do they wrote all about the Sufis. Otherwise, without these resources or without the sources, whatever is written in the book may not be considered as as a correct one. It cannot be considered as a genuine thought or a genuine writing. But after reading all these books, after reading all these sources, then only it came to be known as that whatever was written in the books or whatever was written by the historians are correct. Came to the end of the chapter, Bhakti Sufi Traditions, Theme 6. If you have any doubts, if any point is not clear, if there are any questions, do not hesitate to write in the comment sections. I will answer to your doubts. Till then, stay safe and take care.